Hello there. I'm Andy Schmuckler, the host of this live stream, A Better Human Story. And today I'm going to focus on the American drama, which is pretty important to the whole picture of the human story, where we're heading. We have engaged in an election in which which should best be understood as a major showdown in the ongoing battle between democracy and fascism in this country and more generally in our times. We have a lot to think about suddenly about how this showdown is going to take place. If you'd asked me a week ago, well, I have several essays ready to go that in the wake of the debate the last Thursday night will never see the light of day. They're predicated on a situation that shifted because Joe Biden, who appeared to be the inevitable champion of the side of democracy and the rule of law, had a debate performance that was widely considered disastrous, and it opened up a whole lot of questions that I believe should still be regarded as open about who actually is going to go out there on the field of battle representing the hope that American democracy will survive. Is appropriately the topic of a lot of discussion, and a lot of people have been weighing in. When I saw what happened in the debate, I was hugely discouraged, shocked that an occasion that was well understood to be one that one had to rise to in order to make the best possible use to lead to the outcome that we terribly need in November, that Joe Biden, whom I have a fond feeling for and a good deal of respect for, not only didn't give us his best game, but exposed himself to be much more worrisome in his condition than I had imagined would be possible. I had written just recently more than once, actually. I bet that if both of the candidates went to like the Mayo Clinic and with the agreement that they would get a full battery of tests and that the results would be made public, that Joe Biden would come out the more fit. I thought he would come out as, well, he's old, but he's really in fine condition. He can do the job. Doesn't say exactly what will happen in the next 4 years, but I thought he would get a pretty clean bill of health. It's still the case that I think that Donald Trump is, well, there are a lot of reports from neurologists that they're seeing signs of fairly non-trivial and maybe rapidly advancing dementia issues. So, but the American people don't see Donald Trump as being as worrisome in terms of he's too old for this job, or he's falling apart, or he can't do it. I mean, there are a lot of things that he obviously can't do, like he's called a effing moron by his own Secretary of State back when he was younger and president. But on that occasion, which is probably the most watched occasion of the campaign as anticipated, Donald Trump, though he's still the terrible thing that he is and such a liar, but there's nothing new about that. He was on the top of, he was on his game, and Joe Biden, he was not. You know, people who have been calling on him to step down write a lot of eloquent things about, you know, like he didn't this, he didn't that, and he wasn't even able often to finish a sentence. You know, so the question, it's now up in the air, or unless we're to believe the Biden's family has told him he shouldn't step down, he should keep on fighting, and that seems to be reportedly it's his inclination, and maybe that can be taken at face value, and maybe that kind of messaging in the world is part of a way of setting the stage for something else to happen. I don't know. I don't know what's going to be the situation in a week or 2 weeks, but surely if he's going to step down, that has to happen without wasting a whole lot of time, because there's going to be a hurried process to find his successor anyway. But I just want to say about the question of, you know, should he step down, let alone the question of will he. I want to say one thing, and I want it to be emphasized, because I've been following a lot of this discussion. It seems some people really are having trouble holding on to the centrality of this point. Whatever should be done is whatever has the best chance of saving American democracy, which is to say, if Biden should stay in as the Democratic nominee for president, the reason has to be that is the way that leads to the greatest likelihood that Donald Trump will not gain the powers of the presidency. I don't want to take a bunch of time to say, well, why it's so important that Donald Trump not gain the powers. I mean, that's a whole, you know, I've done so much of that. So many people have done so much of that. But let's just say, you know, the survival of American democracy and the rule of law are quite reasonably regarded as being at stake. People use the expression existential threat, or, you know, the soul of America. I mean, this is a showdown between forces that are not like, you know, a conservative versus a liberal making decisions at the presidential level. It is way more fundamental than that. And most of the people that I read and listen to are saying that this is an election that absolutely must be won. And I've noticed that For example, on Jen Psaki's Sunday show, she had David Plouffe, Obama's old campaign manager, and they were very ambiguous, weighing the question. But I felt that I could see that both of them wanted to avoid siding, telling Biden what he should do, siding against his continuing, but also slipping in various ways that that this is an election that must be won. Anyway, the implication of that is that when it comes to should Biden stay in or step down, the only question that's relevant is what's the best way of making sure Trump loses? It doesn't matter. I mean, it matters. A lot of these people who say he should step down are going out of their way to say things which I also feel a fondness for him, a respect for the job that he's done, that he has a role in American history already as the guy who beat Donald Trump in 2020 and has achieved a great deal. I'm critical about, I think he made some serious mistakes about how he handled the Netanyahu government in Israel around this whole Gaza war. I think I'm less able ever since last December, January, to speak about Biden's presidency in glowing terms. But actually, I used to. And it's still the case that in his first 2 years, he had a record of achievement that was really quite impressive. It took till almost the end of those 2 years to get there, and it was not a good look while Manchin and Sinema were making the Democrats look ineffectual, which, by the way, is why we got the crappy Republican governor here in Virginia that we do. It was just the election occurred that elected Youngkin occurred at the very moment that the Democrats looked completely feckless, and that was Manchin's and Sinema's doing. Had they done what they obviously should have done, the Democrats could have looked good all the way. But they didn't, and so in New Jersey and Virginia, you look at those elections, and it wasn't just Virginia. The guy in New Jersey who won re-election by a little bit when he should have won by a fair amount, he just had that much he could give. But the Democratic governor that we would have had didn't have that many percentage to. But in any event, Biden pulled it out. He got a lot of stuff done by the time of the 2022 election. And he deserves our gratitude. But a lot of people are also warning him, pretty much explicitly, that if he insists on running, and that turns out to have been a real bad move that cost us this must-win election, his whole legacy will be reduced to that. So I went to bed the night of the debate, just sort of with that empty, painful feeling inside, and got to sleep. And then I woke up in the middle of the night, and I just kept on thinking these things through. And I got up in the morning, and I posted on Daily Kos a piece that basically said that the only question that the Democrats should be asking is what's going to be best for getting the Democratic nominee elected president. If that's Biden, go with Biden. If it's not Biden, go with whoever is the best person for that role with that criterion, the most likely to win. I'll tell you an example of why I think that somehow people aren't keeping that in mind well enough. Going back to the Jen Psaki, David Plouffe conversation. They were talking about how if Biden did step down, he would absolutely have to endorse, tell his delegate, endorse Kamala Harris, tell his delegates, I ask you to shift your support from me to Kamala Harris, my loyal vice president. If you understand what this election is and what it's about and what's at stake, and therefore the implications of what's at stake, you don't talk that way. You don't say, well, he's got to do this. No, he's got to say, and Democrats, your job is to choose whoever has the best chance of winning. There isn't any Democratic possibility that would be, so inferior in any way that if they were the most likely to win, we shouldn't choose them because we should choose this person instead because they got a better position on this, or because they're whatever leads to most likely leads to success in a must-win election. That's what it is. If Biden said, "Oh, I picked Kamala Harris," if Kamala Harris is the best one, the one with the greatest chance of winning, let's go with Kamala Harris. But it's a decision that has to be made. And the only important criterion is what's going to win. What's most likely to win? Now, I keep on hearing people who say that we should stick with Biden. And then I hear their reasons for it. And some of them make some sense. They are evidence, things like the polling was after the debate wasn't so bad, and it wasn't that many people who watched it. And besides, well, Trump was lying all the time. Well, that sort of alerted me to, I kind of wondered whether people are thinking clearly enough. I mean, yeah, Trump was terrible, but he's terrible in a way he's always terrible. And he did a good job of being that kind of a terrible. He wasn't hurting himself because he was telling all these lies. People who are supporting him are obviously supporting him in spite of the fact that he lies all the time. But there is that question that people can wrestle with quite legitimately with, well, how much damage did Biden do to himself in that debate last Thursday night? People would say, well, it was not, it was just a fraction of the total electorate. They were 50-some million. And here's the number of people who voted in 2020. So it's just a fraction. And the people who are swing voters, the uncommitted, they weren't the ones who were watching, according to some information, which I don't really quite grasp. But they're saying, well, it was the Trump base and the Biden base. They were watching, and they're not going to change on kind of what they saw. I wanted to believe that. And I wrote the first piece the next day. The Friday morning piece I wrote was basically even-handed. Maybe it wasn't as big of a disaster as I feared. Maybe the alternative is more problematic than I had thought. So I presented sort of an even-handed, but just the main thesis is there's only one question. What's the best thing to do to make sure that Trump doesn't kill off our democracy? Then I continued to mull on things and to process things. And I'm no longer, I'm not certain that I know what's right, what's best. But I came up with a second piece that second day After the Friday piece came the Saturday piece. And the Saturday piece, I had decided that the damage that Biden had done to himself was profound. And it was in large measure irreparable, that some things had been seen by so many people that it can't be unseen. And yeah, not everybody was watching the debate, not everybody saw that. But when you've got 50 million people seeing something that, a lot of the observers that, in these focus groups or these double hater groups that don't like either, people were cringing. People were embarrassed. They found it, you know, there's a guy I said, well, I would vote for Biden even if he was dead. So would I, given this election. If he were on the top of the ticket, I would vote for Biden even if he was dead. But you can't win an election with people who feel that kind of clarity, let's just say, about what's a completely unacceptable outcome. And we don't need to field the most beautiful, capable, charismatic candidate in history. We got to field somebody that a big enough majority of the American people, to overcome the problems with the Electoral College, will choose over Donald Trump. If we lived in the America I would like to think we lived in, nobody would ever vote for somebody like Donald Trump after all that he's shown us in the last 8 years. But that's clearly not the America that we live in. So you go into the campaign mode with the electorate you got, and the electorate we've got now makes Trump winning seem more likely than Biden winning. David Plouffe, with all of his avoiding saying anything like he should drop out, indicated that several times that we're behind. We were behind going into the debate, he said. I'm not sure I agree with that. But now we're more behind, and so obviously whatever went wrong would have to get repaired. There's a number from the polling that I just recently saw that after the debate there was a blip upwards of what was already a worrisome number of 60 couple percent think that Biden, because of his age and infirmities, etc., is not fit to serve as president for the next 4 years. He's, from age 82 to age 86. But that number after the debate went up to 72% of American voters. I think it was, registered voters. I'm not sure. Think that he's unfit to serve as president for the next 4 years. And that may or may not be true, that he's unfit. I've gone from, as I said, from basically defending Biden, saying, challenge Trump to a visit to Mayo, and let's tell the whole country what kind of shape you guys are in. I felt kind of confident. I always said, well, the premise is that he's really in good shape. But I've been shaken. I wouldn't make the bet I said on Wednesday that I would make on that question. By Friday, I wouldn't put money down that Biden would come out looking better. People say, well, he had a bad day. You don't want a president that can have a bad day of that kind. That's how I feel. And I'm not prepared to say that those 72% are wrong. The president doesn't or often have to make a great decision on a bad day. But sometimes, maybe. And also, what else does that imply? If that could happen, I still don't really understand how that could happen. We saw the State of the Union address back in January, and he was impressive, and that was fun. And we saw him go to North Carolina, and he was, I mean, it wasn't exactly impressive, but it was it was a lot better game than what he brought on Thursday. But what does that mean? I mean, the presidency is not an easy job. I mean, it's sort of legendary how we can see how the presidency ages even young people. They come in looking like this, and then they go out 4 years or 8 years later, and the office has taken a toll on them. Well, he's done a good job as a pretty old man in this first term, or at least the first couple of years of the first term. But I don't know if I understand exactly what the implications are that could happen. And if the American people, if 72%, almost 3 out of 4 Americans think that he's unfit, and you got to win the election, is that really the answer to the question of what is the course we can take to get to the maximal probability of the victory that we absolutely need to get? Hard to believe. So I wrote the second piece, which maybe I'll read shortly. And I posted it on Daily Costs, and people were not attacking me in a mean spirit. I was not a popular guy for saying what I was saying. I came around to the belief that that we really need to go through to a different process. And people caution against, well, we don't have a lot of time. We don't have time for the primaries, et cetera. Maybe I'm being naive. Maybe I'm not understanding that even if what I'm saying could be done, there are all kinds of ways of screwing it up, and the chances of our pulling it off well are not great. I don't see that yet. I think that you can come up with. I don't have a proposal for how to come up with a list of a half dozen, let's say, potential standard bearers to replace Biden. But anyway, the first step, it's up to Biden. It is up to Biden. If Biden doesn't voluntarily step down, he is the champ. He is our champion, and we are obligated, if we care about American democracy and the rule of law, we are obligated to help him in every way we can, even if that's the wrong path. If he's the one who has to defeat Trump, then helping him defeat Trump is required of everybody who cares about the things that we Americans supposedly want to represent, and who understands what the nature of the actual contest is, what the stakes are. But I think we can come up with a list that would be agreed upon. And Biden shouldn't say, let's do Kamala Harris, because his loyalty to her or any other reason why he promised to appoint the first African-American woman to be on a major party ticket, all those reasons are fine. They're not trivial. But there's only one goal here. Who can win? Who's most likely to win? There's no reason for Joe Biden to try to make that decision for the whole party. That would not be the way the decision should be made. the whole party. We don't have time to go do Iowa caucuses and New Hampshire primaries and all that. No, but we can create we got till the second half of August before the Democratic National Convention. Surely we can create an event or a process um, to generate the best thing that we can come up with for the purpose that we need it. Who is most likely to win? We can do that. Somehow we could make a list, different ways I can imagine we could do it. People who would be on it would include Kamala Harris. Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, is on people's minds. Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, is on people's minds. My own personal, the best scenario that I can envision for this purpose is Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. I'll say a little bit more about that later, but we can generate a list, and then we can a process can be set up. I don't know if it's got to do with standalone, people on a stage debating. I personally, I prefer that they not campaign against each other, which is what happens on a debate stage. I remember Kamala Harris challenging Joe Biden in a not entirely fair way having to do with busing or something like that. I would like to have the Democratic nominee emerge from a process in which there is no bruising. And when people are campaigning against each other, bruising occurs. That's how you do it. You don't just say, here's why to choose me. You also try to turn people off on the other. And we need to win this election. And I think an unbruised candidate is best for that. So how do we use the time up until the national convention? Well, I would say that we want speeches. Each of those set up something so that each of them speaks to the nation in some kind of a forum that's created. 20-minute speech each, say. They can choose how they make their pitch. They can choose about what they want to tell the American people and the delegates to the convention about themselves, whether they model, this is how I will take on Trump, or some combination of the two. Let them compose the thing. Let them make the pitch. And then we get to the national convention. And maybe then the convention consists largely of each of those half dozen candidates making a second speech. I think that would be better than just repeating what they did in the first one, where they're actually talking to the delegates. Here's the model that I invite you to choose as your standard bearer. But something that for the convention to see right then and there, and for the whole country to see on national television, a different kind of convention. And as you probably know, it's a very modern thing to have the kinds of conventions that we've been having for, 50, I think it's since 1968 was ever since 68. So over 50 years, we've had conventions where everybody knows who's going to be the nominee when they arrive at the convention. Well, maybe in 76, there was some possibility that Reagan would overtake Ford. I can't remember. I think by the time in 80 that Teddy Kennedy's challenge to Jimmy Carter had already failed, but there was something unfortunate about not pulling together more vigorously. But this is a must-win thing. And the delegates will be hearing these candidates and maybe stuff about them. I don't know. It can be set up in various ways. It could even be good television, and which is more than the convention often is for some of those hours. But and then here's the idea that I think is my contribution to solving one of the problems. One of the problems is could be that getting if you got a half dozen candidates, getting a majority for any one of them doesn't necessarily happen quickly. I mean, in our American history, there are conventions that actually went over 100 ballots, if I recall. Was that the Democrats in 1920? I don't remember, but we need to have a convention that is suspenseful and doesn't have the um, smoothness that people have become accustomed to in the last 50 some years, but that reaches a conclusion efficiently, quickly, without people turning off their television sets because this is the 85th ballot. And there's a way of doing that. I'm a fan of ranked choice voting, but never thought of it as performing this service I'm about to describe. I'm a fan of ranked choice voting largely because it can eliminate the problem of people want to vote their conscience, but then that often means throwing away their vote on somebody that they like, but then giving up having any voice on who actually might win. Like people who vote for Ralph Nader down in Florida in 2000. But if they'd voted for their second choice, when Ralph Nader wasn't going to win, didn't have a chance in hell of becoming elected president, but the only two people that could have were George W. Bush and Al Gore, and their second choice overwhelmingly would have been Al Gore. Al Gore would have won Florida. Al Gore would have won the presidency, and we never would have gotten the Iraq War. That's a problem. Third-party candidates are a problem. Voting your conscience in a way that doesn't take into account what actually is going to happen in terms of who actually gets the power is a problem. But ranked choice voting solves that problem. You can vote for Ralph Nader, put Al Gore second. Ralph Nader gets swept off after the first round of tally, and the votes who had Al Gore second go to Al Gore. Al Gore wins. You don't end up helping the guy you like the least, the guy that's furthest away from your values. Al Gore is closer to Ralph Nader than George W. Bush was in terms of the values that Ralph Nader ran on. But the people who vote, anyway, that's what ranked choice voting, that's what I've written about, why it's so valuable. It also enlivens American democracy. There can be a lot of candidates putting out a lot of messages, but not at the sacrifice of eventually you make the decision based among the things that are actually viable. But in the convention, the ranked choice voting has a wonderful byproduct, which is that whenever you have a balloting that's where people rank, want him most, want her second most, want her third most, this one least of all, the process will crank out someone with a majority. There will be a winner. One ballot. There will be a winner. It's been used in some places. Alaska, that last election for the House, where Sarah Palin didn't win because she wasn't people's second choice. People get to express more of what they believe in. It's not just a binary thing. I don't know whether the convention should do ranked choice voting on the first ballot. There's a part of me which thinks, well, let's have more than one ballot and then have ranked choice voting. Or maybe just one ballot and then a second ballot with ranked choice voting. And as it now exists, it seems that it takes time to do the tabulating. You have to figure out, well, who lost, who got the fewest votes, and get rid. But I'm not a computer person. Intuitively, it seems to me there must be a way of setting up a program that that goes through the whole thing really quickly. Okay, you get rid of the fifth place finisher. Those votes go to these other choices. And then you get the fourth place finisher out of the remaining four. There must be a way of you sort of just crank and crank and crank. Maybe, like in a matter of minutes, somebody's got a majority. Now, I can't program that. But is it possible you couldn't? So that's what I suggest. On the third day of the convention, there's the nomination process using ranked choice voting, the first or the second or the third, but soon enough so that people in the country are absorbed in the drama. And we end up with a nominee, and then, as usual, like on the fourth day of the convention, the president and vice presidential nominees give their acceptance speeches and send the delegates out into the country as the parties begins its national campaign. Now, is there a place where we couldn't pretty well count on accomplishing that? I don't think. I think that we would actually come up with a pretty good decision out of that process. But I don't imagine that any of those half dozen people that would be regarded as appropriate, possible next passing the torch to the next generation. I don't think that we Americans need a stellar candidate to beat Trump. I think that there's a substantial majority of Americans that don't want Trump and will support anybody who looks okay, acceptable, normal, would do a decent job. Doesn't have to be a candidate for Mount Rushmore. Best if it is, best if it's somebody who's inspiring. Not really necessary. I don't think. And whether it should be Kamala Harris or not, I know there's a lot of sensitivities. People I talk to, a high percentage of them don't feel like she's the one that will bring America with her. And I agree. Could be wrong. But if she's a nominee, like whoever's the nominee, everybody should get behind her. Also, if she's not the nominee, I think it's quite possible that whoever is the nominee should name her as his vice president. A continuity and also, but The idea that she should be because she's been the vice president, that's not the criterion. Who's most likely to win? Let's not forget who's most likely to win. This convention can go some distance. This whole process can go some distance. First of all, if Biden does step down, and I wish I saw more signs that he would. If Biden does step down, he should announce it in a speech which accomplishes several things. Announcing that, laying out, and embedded with that announcement is an opportunity to say, because this election must be won, and then paint a picture of what Donald Trump represents. So it's a speech that gets a lot of attention in the news media, and it is an opportunity to convey as effectively and powerfully as possible why Donald Trump is absolutely not the person who should be inaugurated come next January. So that's one thing. And then Biden can play a leadership role in establishing the process by which his successor will be chosen. I've laid out, some things about my thoughts about what the process should be, but Biden's passing the baton can be done in a way which shows him to be something beautiful, stepping down. Contrast that with what we've seen of some fascists in this country, and what Netanyahu has done in Israel, what Putin does. The willingness to put the nation ahead of one's own selfish needs is what's conspicuously lacking in Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu. And I think probably Putin too, though it's not quite so naked to my eye anyway. I mean, he's a monster, but I'm not sure if that's exactly the same form. But but Biden can be a heroic figure in stepping down. And again, doesn't step down. That means a guy who at this moment 72% of Americans think is shown himself to be unfit for office because of disabilities having to do with age. Do you really want to go into a must-win election with that? I do wonder why did the folks on Daily Kos really almost, there's almost no support for my position that Biden should step down. I don't fully understand it. There are more important things in this picture than loyalty or appreciation. And you can always show all kinds of appreciation for what he's accomplished. If he's not the best one for winning the election, that should be definitive, decisive. We don't want to put out anything but the best thing we can come up with for a must-win election, because must-win means must win. There's a way in which this whole situation that was so painful to watch ends up being not a disaster, but opening the door to a great opportunity. That was when I wrote my piece about the need for Biden to step down. I based it. It was inspired by an email from Bill McKibben, a hero of the climate movement, who sent out an email about the meaning of what happened in Thursday's debate. He said the debate had caused tectonic plates to shift. And whereas many people experience the debate as spelling disaster and feeling pain and shock, McKibben saw this as a kind of a breakthrough, bringing about a kind of moment of truth that allows things to shift in a very positive way. McKibben said in his email that things have shifted in ways that open up the possibility, not just of decisively beating Trumpism, but of pulling the country out of the polarized death spiral we've fallen into. I like that. There are scenarios where we get relieved of this heavier burden we now have of that 72%, a Democratic nominee being seen as someone who can have such a night as he had on Thursday. Get the American majority, which has been the source of my optimism throughout all this about beating Donald Trump in 2024, is that I do believe that the American majority will reject Trump if they have a way they feel okay about embracing. And I think there are going to be too many people in that 72% who say, well, they won't necessarily see Trump as vividly, as completely unacceptable, as the monster that he is, as the damage that he's threatening, but who don't want to vote for him and won't if they have a decent excuse. But somehow this old man that couldn't finish some of his sentences on that debate night, that may weigh on them too hard, so that, well, I don't like Trump, but at least he seems like he's on top of his game, and I don't feel comfortable with a president who seems to be subject to being out of it. You know, the buck stops there, but what if there isn't the necessary there? Well, that's not a good reason to vote for Trump. Like I said, I'd vote for Trump. I'd vote for Biden, even if he were dead. But I think there are just too many Americans that can't vote for what they saw. And even though they may not have seen the election, that there could be ads that show him doing that. I mean, the Republicans wouldn't have to distort the ads, the video. They wouldn't have to make things up like they did about Biden wandering off at this NATO or D-Day thing. They actually could find genuine footage they could use in ads. And if 50 million people saw it, there's going to be a lot of word of mouth. You don't have to see things to hear from other people how embarrassing it was, how they were appalled by what they saw. That's going to affect a lot more than the 50-some million. And I think that the American people would find acceptable some of the good Democrats that would be on that short list of I don't know if America's come to the point where a woman can be elected president, like Gretchen Whitmer. I do think Gretchen Whitmer would probably be a more effective, get a higher vote total than Kamala Harris, but either one of them would have to become the first female president of the United States. Hillary should have been. If it hadn't been for James Comey making that bonehead play a week before the election, she would have. Maybe if it hadn't been for, well, Putin's probably going to weigh in anyway. But and I don't know if America's ready to elect a Jewish president like this fellow Shapiro, who's very impressive, I think. The governor of Pennsylvania has done a lot of good things. I don't know if you're dealing in a must-win election, do you take that kind of chance? I mean, there's only one criterion: who's most likely to win. If we could have if the strongest candidate would be a woman or a Jew, go with that. But I have not only that, but one other major thing about why I think Gavin Newsom might be the most powerful standard bearer we could put out on the field to do battle with Donald Trump. And that's the essence of it, is to do battle against Donald Trump. Here's how I put it in that piece I wrote, published on Saturday on Daily Kos. My own fantasy is of California Governor Gavin Newsom stepping into that role and cleaning Trump's clock the way he reportedly cleaned DeSantis's clock on Fox News. He made a debate between himself and DeSantis on enemy territory work for him. And it showed not only that he's good at hand-to-hand combat, metaphorically speaking, but he had an appetite for it. He was willing, and he was skillful. He got himself before the Fox News audience, and he won. But the Democrats, for this, what is it now, 30-year period that I've been fighting this fight against the rising force of fascism, the Democrats have had difficulty finding a fighter. I won't go with the problems of that Obama showed. And Biden's not naturally a fighter. He's a guy to make friends and work with people on the other side and to establish goodwill. In a lot of situations, that's a good thing. But what's been rising on the right for the last 30 years is not something that you deal with that way. You need a fighter. You need a fighter more than John Kerry was when he allowed himself to get swift voted as badly as he did and lost the election because of it. You need a fighter in a way that Obama wasn't, who refused to deal with the opposition that was made its top priority to make him fail, as if they're his enemies, and to go up against them, even though he had a great jab if he was willing to use it. But Gavin Newsom is a Democrat who has an appetite for the fight. You know, I've watched Trump rise in political success since he came down that elevator in 2015 as throwing his hat into the Republican ring. And I watched him debate Little Marco and Low Energy Jeb, and then watched him hover over Hillary Clinton so that she, good Democrat that she was, only later figures out, geez, I wish I had said to him, back off, you creep. There's been something in the liberal world that sort of gets in the way of back off, you creep. I remember when Ronald Reagan at some New Hampshire debate situation in the primaries against Bob Dole, I guess it was, in what was that year? 1980. He had set up to dramatize his aggressiveness about, I paid for this microphone. We only found out later that he had set that up, but it was a good moment for him. People like a president that's feisty, and we need a fighter to go up against Donald Trump. And one of the ways that Biden failed was he absolutely failed to score any points off of Trump, even though Trump was lying right and left and doing abominable things. You put Gavin Newsom in that situation. I think that he's going to be the first guy. He would be the first guy. I'm not prejudging that that's what's going to happen. It's just what I think would be it's my proposed answer to what's the best course. Put Gavin Newsom in the ring with Donald Trump and have him go toe-to-toe. And I think he'd be able to win. Maybe I overestimate him. Trump is people like Lawrence O'Donnell, whom I very highly respect. I think he does a great job most of the time. But he keeps on talking about how stupid Donald Trump is. Well, in some ways. But in some ways, there's a genius there. And the fact that none of these professional politicians, little Marco or you know, and Lion Ted Cruz, and the way he's just naturally into fighting and insulting and with no inhibitions caused by any responsibility to what's true and what's fair. The pros have gone up against him and not done so terribly well. The American people, I think, may be turned off to him, but I can't think of a Democrat that's ever, or a Republican that's beaten him going mano a mano. I think that Gavin Newsom probably could. He's hardworking when it comes to these battles, anyway. He went out of his way on the issue of what the Republicans were doing with abortion and IVF. He went out of his way. He's the governor of California, but he was running as if he was running a national campaign. And he went to Alabama, or he made use of the IVF thing in Alabama. He was looking for a target, and he went after it, and he created some very powerful videos about a policeman pulling over a woman who's trying to leave the state to get an abortion or something like that. And he, as governor of California, supposedly, not really, he's a national candidate. I think he was thinking he was in waiting for 2028. And I think he was doing a good job of getting his national campaign for 2028 going by pretending that, I mean, it's not like it wasn't true that the problems with Arizona's 1868 anti-abortion law coming into effect was going to create problems for him as governor of California next door, that women would be leaving the state of Arizona to get the medical care that they need. You know, he's looking for ways of fighting, and that's been missing. That has been missing for a long time among the Democrats. There's nothing about liberalism per se that prevents someone from being a fighter. FDR said, I welcome their hatred when he was addressing the malefactors of great wealth that were going up against him and his New Deal. He was a fighter, and he was able to win again and again and again against powerful enemies. But something happened to the Democratic Party and the liberal mindset in the years that have come since. Gavin Newsom's a fighter. I think he's a skillful one. So that's why more than I want him because he's a white male and therefore no bigotries to overcome. And not because he's a good-looking, tall guy. Tall is good for presidential candidates, I think the record shows. But especially because we need to obliterate Trump and Trumpism. We need to move as many Americans as possible to recognize the destructiveness and ugliness and evil that Trump and the Trump Party represent. Need to press the battle to maximize the number of Americans who get, oh, so that's what they are. I don't want that. Democrats have not been very good at exposing the reality. And I've talked a lot about how Democrats have been very slow to perceive the reality, but that goes back into my Better Human story, where there's an absence of an understanding of all the connections in the big picture, and that something has arisen on the American political right that's essentially a coherent force that consistently works to make things worse. But part of it also has to do with the lack of a fighting spirit, where somebody can get swift boated and be sort of rocked back on their heels and not come out and expose the swift boaters for what they are. And thereby also expose the Karl Rove Bush's brain that the American people should have been rejecting in 2004 because the way he conducted himself in his first term. There's plenty there in the way we went to war in Iraq that could have been exposed. But it ended up, people saw W as the war hero. Picture of him in the mission accomplished on that battleship or whatever it was, aircraft carrier. And they managed to make John Kerry look like he was the coward. And he was the guy with the Purple Heart who'd had a very meritorious tour in Vietnam for which he had volunteered, while the rich George W. Bush had cheated and walked out on the plum his father got him to keep him out of harm's way. Lies have been winning too long. The truth has to fight effectively. And we will win this election if the truth has an effective fighter at the helm. That's what we need. We have an opportunity, like Bill McKibben said, to pull out of our death spiral. And the death spiral has been a function of both sides. The Republican Party got taken over by this coherent force to the point where you can't find anything they're doing that actually makes things better. I can't. I'm being perfectly honest. That's not how I feel about the Republican Party that I grew up with, or all the way up till, well, I mean, it was starting to happen as soon as Bill Clinton was elected president. 92. But then when you get to W and then even further along with Trump, where you actually have him promising, I will turn this country into a fascist state aligned with Vladimir Putin and no longer helping the free people of Ukraine to resist him. And I will turn the Justice Department into a tool of my vengeance against the people who oppose me. And meanwhile, on the left, we've had a shortage of fighters. We've had a shortage of recognition, which is why I think my Better Human story is important, which is, a much bigger level. This is a showdown in a large battle, this election. But the battle is larger and it's all connected. We got a lot of things we got to fight about, not just in this country, but it's a global thing. And not just in these times, but this is an extension of something that's been going throughout history. My Better Human story exposes that. But we'll stick with this battle. How do we win this election? Joe Biden, I hope, will do the patriotic thing. I'm pretty sure that is really what should be done. And why am I sure? Well, I got some confidence, not that I don't make mistakes, but if I looked at the company that I'm in, if I look at the thing that Tom Friedman wrote in the New York Times and the very powerful statement of the whole New York Times editorial board and David Iglesias, and if I look at what the people who I think know best the play of the political forces on the current battlefield, disproportionate number of the people that you should look to for, well, what do you think? You've been looking at this stuff, how politics played out for the last, for a whole series of decades, through all kinds of situations. If you look at that group of people, what I'm saying fits in with them. I don't understand why Daily Kos, which is really eager for victory, comes to different conclusions. No, he was such a good president. He deserves our gratitude. We liberals are always too hard on our leaders. That we're all too quick to. They're loyal to their people. We're not loyal to theirs. This is not an issue of loyalty. This is just an issue of what's the best way to win. And I believe that. We hear that Biden's family is saying, keep fighting. And we hear that that's what Biden wants to do. And I hear that there are some Democratic leaders that are on record saying, I'm sticking with Joe or something. I don't know if anything else is happening backstage. I don't know if anybody has access to him that embodies the kind of, I read that Chuck Schumer is open to alternatives. That's about as far as I've been able to see. And maybe these I think it's good for politicians to say, yeah, we're sticking with Joe as a public thing, so that Joe looks all the more heroic while they, behind the scenes, they say, Joe, there's 72% that don't think you're fit. You know as well as we do, you've been telling us that Donald Trump is a threat, an existential threat to American democracy. Don't ruin for selfish reasons. Don't ruin your legacy, and for patriotic reasons, pass the torch to somebody who has a better chance of defeating Donald Trump than you do with that 72%. And if we get a decent leader that the American people feel comfortable rallying around, maybe Bill McKibben's right that we can not just defeat Trump and Trumpism, but essentially put the country on a new trajectory. That we can get a leader that the people have rallied around to get rid of Trump and will follow in doing a variety of things that need to be repaired in this country. Because the force of fascism has been very powerful for too long. It was very powerful enough to, in W's presidency. I wrote about the problem of fascism back in 2005. And I've never been one to bring that word in. Radicals like to do that. I'm not a radical. But stuff started happening that really called for a different name. LBJ and his war in Vietnam was not a problem of fascism. Some people like to call it that. No, it wasn't. But it was starting to rise with, also with what they were doing with, there's a lawlessness and a lack of respect for the constitutional process in the way the Republicans dealt with Clinton. It was beginning to rise. A lot of lies and a lot of disrespect for the Constitution and the processes it gives us and the norms by which we're supposed to operate as a democracy. It goes back to Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich, Fox News. It's been coming. We have a chance now to defeat this thing. The first step is November's election. Even if we win that, there's a lot more that needs to be accomplished in this battle against fascism. And it can be done. The American people can rally behind good leadership that plays its cards right and starts repairing some of the damage. The second topic for today is part of the damage that needs to be repaired. And there's no easy. I say that there are three basic battles that not all of it's battling, actually, but it's all part of a battle against fascism. The fascist force is represented right now. Well, maybe I should say 4. Yeah, I'll say 4 for the moment. Maybe I'll regret that and come back to 3. But there's Trump, beating Trump. And I want to throw in, either separately or as part of the same package, the Trump party. They have been appalling. They're not going to be anything else anytime soon. America needs a good conservative party. This ain't it. People keep on saying, well, they need to be defeated and defeated and defeated, and eventually they're going to. Yeah, I don't know. If they can be defeated this time, will that lead them to change? I'm not, unless it's a landslide. And boy, that sure isn't what it looks like at the moment. That's what back in January, I thought there might be a real one-sided wipeout election. It's hard for me to see that happening by November now. So I think we're still going to have to deal with the Trump party, a party in which, if you have integrity like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, well, you're going to get kicked out. Yeah, that's a problem. A party that's willing to go up to New York, and the Republican Speaker of the House will do what he does up there to support a guy who's being found by a jury of his peers guilty unanimously of felonies. That's a problem. So yeah, the Trump party too. And the Trump party was a problem before Trump came into the picture. From the nomination of the first Bush in 1988 until the way they dealt with Bill Clinton, not respecting that the people had hired him to do a job, looking for some way to destroy him. If they can't find a whitewater way, well, here's the blue dress. Let's go with that. That's not legitimate. So the parties, and then you get Fox News and all the propagandists, really good ones. I mean, really geniuses, Gingrich, Limbaugh, Roger Ailes, Karl Rove, the propagandists poisoned the minds of tens of millions of Americans. So that by the time you get to 2015, a measure of how broken these guys had made the Republican conservative America is that when you get a bunch of Republicans in 2015 running for the presidential nomination, as disreputable as so many of those Republicans were, Ted Cruz, and we can see how morally craven Marco Rubio is, campaigning to be the vice president under Trump. I mean, it's just disgusting. But out of all them, there were 40% of the Republican base that looked at Donald Trump and chose him to be their nominee. It was enough to make him the Republican nominee, even though, according to what I believe to be true, if you had asked the Republicans of an earlier era, and my knowledge of the Republican world goes back to Eisenhower's being president and all that came next, including Richard Nixon with his crimes, but still not a Trump. I don't think the Republicans of any of those eras would ever have thought to make someone like Donald Trump president. I mean, he showed us who he was. But the propagandists had put them into a mindset that I've been trying to understand with spotty success. Generally a feeling of, I still can't quite get it. So the Republican base sticks with Donald Trump, believes obvious lies like the election was stolen, like he did nothing wrong, instead of his being indicted for good reason by average Americans on grand juries and found against by average Americans unanimously on the Republican base is something that needs to be brought back to some, from wherever it is they are, that allows all that to happen. They need to be brought back to the better angels of their nature. And I live in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. And this light that's lighting this side of me is coming from a mountain and a valley and the sky, all covered with forests. And I live on the western flank of the Shenandoah Valley. It'll go 70% for Trump. And they're good people. I don't mean they're all good people, but if you met my Trumpian neighbors, you would find probably the same proportion of people you think of as being good people, if you're not talking about politics, as you would in some decent liberal suburban neighborhood surrounding Washington, where I used to live. To have them back on the side of the goodness that when I was a talk radio host here talking with the conservatives for 10 years out here, and that they believed in a lot of wonderful things and they lived according to some wonderful values. And now they support in their politics something that's the opposite of them. I don't understand exactly how they got, what that consciousness is about. And I'm not claiming I know how to bring them back to being in their politics as good people as they are when you do business with them or you're in their neighbors. But we got to do something. And that's been very painful for me to watch good people go over to the dark side, however you want to put it. But as painful as anything is the Supreme Court. And that's my second topic of the day. What do you do when the Supreme Court has become an enemy of the rule of law? And let me just say, well, gosh, what do I want to say first? First of all, I've loved the Supreme Court. I've loved the idea of justice for, as far back as I can remember, even as in the one-digit kid age, And then Clarence Darrow became my boyhood hero. And then when I was in college, I took a course on the history of American constitutional law from a great teacher, a fellow named Robert McCloskey, who actually wrote some of the best books that we read for that course. And I started thinking, I want to go, that's what I want to do. I want to be on the Supreme Court. I want to help make these beautiful decisions. I mean, that was a golden age. This is 1964. I take Gov 124 from Robert McCloskey, and I fall in love with the Constitution. And I've written about it. And I'm not qualified to teach constitutional law at a law school, but I've taught constitutional law to bright juniors in high school and like that, because I love this stuff. There's such a magnificent process, even though I've been aware of some terrible decisions like Dred Scott and Plessy versus Ferguson, and the various corporate decisions to keep workers weak up until the New Deal. Then, so that I know that there can be a lousy court. Bush v. Gore was was sort of a warning bell that this court is becoming sort of nakedly political, even with some better people on it. And now we got these people. I don't know whether, let me see if I can find this thing. Yeah, at the terrible dilemma of the defenders of rule of law. I started as a piece. I don't know if it's going to come to ultimate fruition. And I wasn't in this piece going to go into detail about the evidence that the Supreme Court has become the opposite of what it should be. Let me not worry about that piece. I can just do a quickie version here. It's been building for some years. We can see that the Supreme Court has been built by some very powerful interests. The court we have now, I mean, let me just refer anyone who's interested in going to this to Sheldon Whitehouse. He's a senator from Rhode Island. He's on the Judiciary Committee. He's got a book about, and he continues to fight the fight. But he's also not much of a, he's not a fighter. He makes the good case. And he's uncovered a lot of truth. He and others have uncovered a lot of truth about how we came to have this court. I mean, we know that the court has fallen in public esteem very quickly to an unusually low level, well beneath a quarter, a half of the public trust the Supreme Court. What is it? 39% now have a favorable view of the Supreme Court. So apparently people are paying some attention. Maybe, I don't know how much of that has to do with the Dobbs decision, overturning Roe v. Wade. And I don't know how much it's got to do with what's been exposed about the naked corruption in the usual sense of the word. They don't have a code of ethics that's enforceable. Nobody can enforce anything on any of them. Clarence Thomas and Alito can do the things that have been exposed, and they should recuse themselves from cases that involve the attempt to overthrow the election of 2020, and they don't, and nobody can make them. They violate, I think, some laws actually, but who's going to enforce them? They're immune from successful impeachment. So even if the Democrats had enough votes to launch an impeachment, you need 2/3 to convict them. And there's not nearly enough integrity on the Republican side, not nearly enough to get 17 or whatever Republican votes to convict any Supreme Court justice that's doing the work of the Republican Party. And that is what this Supreme Court is doing. They are not an arbiter that they're supposed to be, calling balls and strikes. Doesn't matter who's at bat. You look at the pitch, you look at the strike zone. It's in the strike zone, it's a strike. If it's outside the strike zone, it's a ball. Whichever team's up. That's what they're supposed to do. That is not what they do. Even before they've loaded all this up there, their decisions on money in politics. Citizens United, that was back in 2011. Obama was president. Their decisions on voting rights. Oh, we're confident, they falsely claim, that we don't need to have the Justice Department oversee changes in election eligibility laws that are being implemented by these former states of the Confederacy. That's way behind us, they pretend to believe. Just like with the Citizens United. They pretend to believe, well, we don't have to worry about this corrupting American politics. They open the floodgates to money. Of course it's going to corrupt American politics. You'd have to either believe that they're stupid or that they are basically doing the work, corrupt work of interest that put them on the bench. And then White House and others have exposed uh, that these interests, which are manifested, Leonard Leo, the Federalist Society, grooming these right wingers to become the reliable voters for the plutocracy and for fascism. In the case of Alito, I would say, or theocracy, maybe would be better in his case. I mean, these are all plutocracy, theocracy, and fascism are very compatible bedfellows, as is being demonstrated. And that also goes back into my Better Human Story. My website is a betterhumanstory.org. And I show something about the nature of a force, a coherent force. And there are different forms that it takes. And the theocratic imposition of my will against overpowers anybody else's rights. And I'm right, and I have no respect for anybody who disagrees with me, that Alito represents. And the plutocracy, which says, there's no such thing as enough money for me, no such thing as enough power for me. So I'm willing to do whatever it takes to take money from the average person to give to people who already have the most, and power from the average person and give to the mightiest. That's what we're up against. The Supreme Court's supposed to be the rule of law, triumphing over the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must, which is my definition. I mean, it's not my line. It comes from Thucydides, talking about putting words in the mouths of the Athenians in his Peloponnesian Wars. It's a great line. The strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. And I've seized upon that and said, this describes what happens when there is no justice. And this Supreme Court is all about, we got the power, we represent the rich and powerful, we represent the political party that's run on behalf of the rich and the powerful, and we will do what we can. If it serves our purpose to overthrow Roe v. Wade, we'll do that. If it serves our purpose to distort history and the Constitution to prevent reasonable gun laws, we'll do it. My theory about why they care about guns is the guns is a way of getting millions and millions of one-issue voters of a certain stripe, among whom I live, to vote for the Republicans because they defend a misreading of the Second Amendment. Ideally, Americans would come to a settlement about guns, which would meet all the legitimate reasons why citizens should have rights to bear arms, which until very recently wasn't considered by constitutional thinkers to be about individual rights so much as a strong militia being necessary for the defense of militia, that clause, a former Chief Justice appointed by a Republican president, Warren Burger, appointed by Nixon, said it was the biggest fraud. What the gun lobby was doing about the Second Amendment was the biggest fraud he'd seen in his whole life. It was an absurd interpretation, but it really does help Republicans for there to be no resolution where people have the right to have weapons, not the kind you can kill a whole crowd of people in a minute. That's not a legitimate right. You can't shout fire. The First Amendment isn't absolute, neither is the Second Amendment. And there's no need for us to have, laws such that we have 10 times as many deaths by guns in our country as in other countries that are perfectly free. But you can tell people they're propagandists. If they start passing laws like this, we must oppose those laws. If they pass those laws, all of our other freedoms will disappear. Well, where's the evidence for that? There ain't none. Yeah, the people in France and Germany and Denmark and Australia, they're free. Public safety gets a decent say. But if you keep the American people at each other's throats over this issue, the Republicans have been able for a long time to get a bunch of one-issue voters. Oh, I know. I encountered this as a candidate for Congress when I was a Democratic nominee in 2012. If you're not for an absolutist reading of the Second Amendment, I don't need to know anything else about you. They thought they were defending their liberties. They were just buying propaganda that put out by a political force that benefits from people being afraid, that being led to believe that everything good that they've got depends on preventing any kind of laws to govern firearms in the hands of civilians. Bump stocks, for example. The way this court struck down a law to ban bump stocks after the bump stocks played a role in turning a weapon that shouldn't have been legal in the first place into a machine gun so that Las Vegas massacre could occur. They do the Republican Party's bidding, and the Republican Party does the bidding of these various currents of brokenness that are contrary to justice. But maybe nothing better illustrates the complete moral bankruptcy of today's Supreme Court. Moral bankruptcy doesn't really capture it. They are an extension of a larger fascist force. The fascist force that's been rising in America now controls the Supreme Court. That's the way I want to put it. And nothing illustrates it more blatantly than what they did with Trump's presidential immunity claim. Basically, just about everybody agreed they had no need to take the case. They should have done what Jack Smith said in December. Just take the case like they did in the Nixon thing. Give us a quick decision. Let's get on with this. The American people have an enormous interest in seeing that trial. All these indictments of this former president, would-be future president. They should see what he did in a trial before the election. Now, Trump has shown consistently, he knows he's got no defense against just about anything. The documents case, I gather, is pretty open and shut. The easiest one, they said. Yeah, it's easy. That crappy judge is delaying that so it doesn't happen. Oh, so frustrating. He's got no defense. He's got a defense, though. It's just a strategic defense. It's delay. There was no reason to delay unless you wanted to help Trump avoid being held accountable by the rule of law. And there is no other interpretation of what the Supreme Court has done there. They gave him, well, let's see, today's July 1st. They should have disposed of it in December. So more than half a year of delay, completely unnecessary delay. Look at what Judge Chutkan said about his claim of presidential immunity. It was really, really good. Look at, but okay, he appealed it. He went to the circuit court, a panel of those judges, headed, I think, by a Republican appointed judge. They did a masterful, you don't need to do anything more job of sweeping that away. On with the trial. No, He appealed it to the Supreme Court. They should have decided it right like that, or not taken it at all. Just said, we're lifting the stay, let the trial proceed. Or if they felt they had to put their voice behind it, they could have done that quickly. Instead, it wasn't even subtle. Just this morning, so the Supreme Court sided with the criminal. There's really no doubt about his guilt. I'm not saying that a jury shouldn't hear the case and convict him only if the prosecution proves beyond a reasonable doubt. That's what we do in the court. In public opinion, we get information and we understand what we're looking at and we draw the necessary conclusions. We rarely get so much information on which we can draw such a strong conclusion as that Trump is a criminal. He's a one-man crime wave. And the crimes for which he would have been tried in Judge Chutkan's court, I would say, I can't think of any crime in American history as serious as those crimes. The American people should have already heard the trial, and their verdict should already have been reached by a fair jury, but it hasn't. Parenthetically, maybe it's parenthetical, I just this morning got a notice. I haven't had a chance to read more than what showed up on my phone as like a news bulletin. Is that the Supreme Court on this Monday, July 1st, at the very end, they delayed and delayed and delayed as long as they could, slow walking at every step. But today they've handed down a decision that the president does enjoy absolute immunity for actions performed in official capacity, but not any presidential immunity for actions not taken in an official capacity. I'll be interested to see what Andrew Weissman and Neil Katyal and other people who know more than I do about what you mean by official capacity. Is it okay? I can imagine that there's a meaning of official capacity that you don't want people suing the president for approving incendiary bombing of Tokyo or something like that in the conduct of World War II. I don't know but I do understand, I believe, I can say without too much doubt, that what Trump is supposed to be tried for in Judge Chutkan's court, federal court in D.C., is predominantly or for things that are quite clearly not in an official capacity. If he's trying to win the election or overturn the election, he's acting as a candidate with his own personal interest. He's not serving as president who's got presidential responsibilities that he executes in official acts. So I don't know if there are some indictments that are clearly official acts. I don't know. Or maybe there are acts where you need to sort out but I feel pretty confident from what I've heard over the months that even if you sweep away a few of those indictments because they're arguably official acts, you're left with important crimes that were committed by Donald Trump and his accomplices that can proceed to trial, except it's too late for the trial. But here's my, I'm kind of a worrier and an optimist at the same time. I always look for what is the best case scenario that we can hope for here. There's been something that's been bandied about, which is the cause for some optimism. And I don't know if the particulars of this decision, which, I've summarized the way it got summarized for me on my phone, I don't know. But that Judge Chutkan will not be able to proceed to trial, but she can proceed to some kind of a process whose ostensible purpose, legitimately, arguably, its purpose, would be to, for example, maybe it would be put as, we need to hold a hearing on, or a series of hearings with witnesses and everything, in which people will be testifying about things which will enable us to make determinations about which of these indictments can go forward when a trial occurs. The Supreme Court has tasked us to do some sorting out, and we can sort this out in a process which will, and here's the optimistic part, can't have a trial at this point. The pre-trial processes take 88 days, or we'll get to the election. You can't have a trial, but you can launch more quickly into some hearings that will have a public face, will not have all the advantages of in terms of educating the American people about what happened, but will nonetheless expose people to a whole lot that if they're following it, it will serve as sort of a trial light. I'm hoping that the Andrew Weissman types, who I think Weissman's one of the people who's talked about that possibility, so exposing them that well is a lot better than not exposing them at all. But to go back to the court, I mean, the court wasn't going to find that presidents can do anything and never be held accountable no matter what their crime. That whole thing about can they assassinate a political opponent? It was ridiculous. I mean, everybody said that the whole claim was ridiculous, hardly worthy of the Supreme Court's attention. I don't know if this decision is unworthy too, but to go back to the problem with the court is supposed to be the arbiter that uses the law and the Constitution and applies the law and the Constitution according to established precedent, according to certain norms of legal reasoning. And it's a whole big thing that they're supposed to do. They're not supposed to be agents of one of the sides in our political battle. And we, again, like with the Trump election coming up, we're dealing with democracy versus fascism. And not only is this Supreme Court clearly partisan again and again and again, but they are partisans for a political party that isn't the usual mixture that we see normally in American parties of the constructive and the destructive. They are partisans for a party that's lawless. Mike Johnson up there in New York attacking the rule of law because he wants to he knows that his bread is buttered by defending the criminal. Yeah. So it's not just a party. It's not like say when you have an Eisenhower versus Stevenson race, you don't want the Supreme Court to be allied with either set of interests that are behind them. This what we've got now, Trump and the Trump party and the plutocracy and the theocracy and the lawlessness. That's really not what you want the Supreme Court to be aligned with, and that's what they are aligned with. So much of their law is pretense. One of the things that Senator Whitehouse has exposed is that there are the plutocracy, the Federalist Society types. They have set up a whole system where they not only give bribes to these justices, but they provide them with phony arguments. They've got some programs where they can sort of find language in previous decisions uh, that can fake that you're dealing with what has the court said before, like a court's supposed to wonder, and what does history show about the meaning of this or that. They can come up with all kinds of stuff that can be woven into a false argument. So I believe that if you look at their gun decisions, for example, and Heller back in 2008 or 9, and Bruin that Judge Thomas wrote a couple years ago, this is fake stuff. It's phony. It's like the interests put them on the court. They groom them. They put them on the court. They give them fake arguments. They give them junkets. In Thomas's case, they let him live the life of the super rich guy. $4 million plus dollars worth of unreported gifts that have been exposed by what is it, ProPublica? But they also, what is it, history and tradition or something like that is the fake way of half writing their decisions for them so that they gloss over. So they not only lie about what they know about what's going to happen when they gut the Voting Rights Act, and Texas and North Carolina immediately started disenfranchising predominantly black people. And they pretend, that this is not going to result in any kind of, this opening the floodgates to money isn't going to result in any kind of corruption of the political process by money. Huh. But not only that, but they gloss their decisions with things that the people who put them on the bench. So what do we do? If you recognize that this Supreme Court is the opposite of what it's supposed to be, I think this is a serious dilemma, which makes me very uncomfortable. I see two choices, basically. You continue to treat the Supreme Court as if it's playing the role that it's supposed to be playing, and it gets the last word on all of our conflicts, whether it's abortion or bribery that they just decided, and gutting the Chevron thing that the corporate world wants to get the regulatory agencies neutered so that they can make money in any way they want, regardless of the collateral damage. Are we going to let them continue? Are we going to pretend that they are entitled, that they had the authority that we've given the Supreme Court for all these years since Marbury versus Madison, back when Jefferson was about to assume the presidency? Well, if we do that, we're essentially giving up on the rule of law because they are not being governed by the law or the Constitution. They're faking that. So the rule of law loses if we do that. So what else can we do? Well, we can stop giving them the last word. We can defy the Supreme Court. We can say this court is no longer legitimate. And I lean in that direction, but I also see that's also very dangerous for the rule of law. The people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th, they were committing crimes because they believed that the rule of law had let them down. I gather that they believed that the election actually had been stolen. Now, what do you do if the election is stolen? I mean, what would you do if they were right? If the election had been stolen from Trump by Biden, are you supposed to just let the thief take office? Well, the difference between those people who took the law into their own hands and tried to, attack the Capitol and prevent the thief from being certified the winner. And what I'm entertaining with respect to the Supreme Court, where I say, well, let's defy the Supreme Court, is that they were wrong in terms of the truth. The truth is that Biden won the election, and that was established in a whole variety of ways. It was a lie that had been stolen. But still, if you defy the Supreme Court, there are going to be a lot of people who will question whether you're doing anything different from what we know that those people were doing on January 6th, which is which is violating the rule of law. The rule of law in America says the Supreme Court gets the last word. So part of the task, if we go down that route, and I'm not suggesting we go down that route right now, by the way, because we got to win the election first. Part of the task is to educate the American people about the terrible thing that that this fascistic force has created out of our Supreme Court. I actually, I think some people will say, well, what we should do is expand the court. And I'm for that, probably. And have lifetime, no longer lifetime tenure. I mean, those are steps in the right direction. Maybe they're as good as we can do. But these guys are on the court now. And they're doing a lot of damage. And the idea of putting a few more justices on the court, which is not illegitimate, takes some votes, though, that we may not have. And the idea of instituting, it'd have to be a change in the Constitution, I think, because the Constitution says that they are lifetime tenure. That is not a quick process. How many years can we afford to have a fascist force making decisions to resolve all our conflicts in a way which feeds the fascist force? I don't think we got that kind of time. And at the very least, defiance can be part of the education of the American people, because I don't expect most people understand that I don't know what that 39% approval, which is very low, says about what they understand about what this court has become. But that issue should be put front and center. If we can beat Trump, if we can't beat Trump, well, there goes the rule of law. At least, who knows how long that would last. But, when the Bolsheviks took over in 1917, it wasn't until 1990 or so that that regime fell. It can be a long time. People say, it's the kind of thing that if you lose what we would lose if we got Trump for a second term, it's very hard to get back what you've lost. And I study history, but I don't feel like I understand what the probabilities are of how long we would be an authoritarian rather than democratic, dictatorial, strongman, fascistic, all those words. I don't know. Would we be that way for a generation? Would we be that way as long as the Soviet Union was what Lenin and Stalin made it? It changed over time, but I don't know. I don't want to find out. I don't want to have to find out. So how do we defy the Supreme Court? I don't have good answers for that. If I didn't feel that we need to avoid defiance of the Supreme Court while we're moving toward that election, because that would be a big distraction. But if that weren't the case, one fantasy I have is, what would I do if I were Judge Chutkan? Or what would I have done if I were Judge Chutkan? And the Supreme Court was delaying and delaying and delaying. What I might have done once it became clear that the Supreme Court was behaving in a completely indefensible way about this presidential immunity appeal that Trump was doing, a form of defiance would have been to ignore the fact that the case was up on appeal to the Supreme Court and begun a trial. Just begun it. Maybe she could have roped in that panel on the circuit court to go in with her. I mean, none of these people would have done any of that stuff. I'm not pretending that would have happened. I mean, if you're a federal judge, how likely is it that you're going to lead the charge in that kind of a way? But she could have done it. It would have dramatized something that the American people need to look at. But I think we got to look at these things. Election first, and then the court, and then the long-term project of rescuing the Republican base from whatever the people like Limbaugh and Gingrich and Fox News and Karl Rove and Donald Trump have done to their consciousness, their understanding, their ability to see what's in front of their eyes, however we want to understand it. Eventually, if we want a healthy democracy again, we need a president who believes in the rule of law. We need a Supreme Court that does the job the Supreme Court's supposed to do of calling balls and strikes and not basically choosing which side's going to win. And we need an American public that doesn't have tens of millions of people that can be led to believe the unbelievable and to support the unsupportable. It's not a situation we can celebrate that we're in. But we're in that situation. And I think that if Joe Biden plays his present cards admirably and helps to initiate a process which leads to an outcome, which will win us that election and win the allegiance of the American people behind the decency and the normalcy and the willingness to play by the rules. I do believe that Bill McKibben was right, that we can not only defeat Trump and Trumpism, but we have now, because of this terrible happening in the debate, we have a chance to take the field with a side that actually might redeem an America that's entered into a kind of a death spiral with fascism menacing it from numerous angles and putting the survival of our constitutional order at stake. I think this disaster can be turned into an opportunity where the door gets open to the better future we need for our country. Thank you. I will be back on Thursday, which is the 4th of July, to do what I can with whoever is interested in hearing about how I'm trying to put forward a framework for understanding the forces at work in the human world that's helpful not only for saving American democracy, but also for helping human civilization to survive on this planet for the long haul, rather than destroying itself, which is a very real possibility. I think we can all see that possibility. So I'm going to talk about that big picture stuff. Today it's all about America, a country that took a huge step forward for humankind back in 1787 with the Constitution. It's been very imperfect, but also a beacon to the world about there's a better way than the top-down, authoritarian, people used and exploited and by the power on top rather than the power on top, used by the people to achieve the common good. Thank you. Bye-bye.